we're going to start with what we just saw. Detroit Lions 31, Minnesota Vikings 9. Lions officially get the number 1 seed here.
Yep.
The NFC playoff picture goes through Detroit. It was a closer game than the score would indicate. It was back and forth in the first half, 10-6 after the first half. More of a defensive battle, not exactly what we expected as far as the shootout goes. Detroit's defense stood up in the red zone. We'll have some stats and some things that happened that were pretty surprising. But what's your initial reaction for the 31-9 win for the Lions here?
Yeah, I mean, I think for a while this was a very close game, but it ended up in a real paddling. You know, the Lions ended up with a clear, decisive, conclusive victory and take over from the Rams, who they now have to go play again, as the most conclusive victory against Minnesota this season. I mean, this was the most decisively the Vikings have been beaten. And honestly, I think the Vikings were outcoached on both sides of the ball. They were outcoached and out-executed on both sides of the ball. You know, Minnesota, we speculated what would they do on defense? Would they stay aggressive? Would they back off? They stayed aggressive for the 4th consecutive game. Ben Johnson, Jared Goff, the Lions offense had answers, and it carved them up. Meanwhile, on the other side, the Vikings had no answers whatsoever to a similarly aggressive Lions defense, even though it was banged up and missing players and got more players missing in the game. This is a bad result for Minnesota, not just because they lost and everything that was on the line, but because of how conclusive it was.
Just to answer the question, because we spent so much time talking about Flores' defense versus Ben Johnson's offense, and would Flores change the first run PFF numbers as far as the blitz goes? Jared Goff, 20 of 25 for 199, touchdown. He had 2 picks in there. One was the tip pass by Ivan Pace. One was the first down arm punt in there.
Yeah.
But it was another 25 out of 36 dropbacks where they blitzed, where they came after him. So it was very much the same game plan. Story of the game, though, with the high leverage plays. And shout out to all the Lions fans coming in, paying the bills, as they say.
Here to pay the bills.
They're all fired up, including Derek, the owner over here.
Is a Lions fan. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know where he got he's wearing like a Lions, like full suit, like velvet suit. I mean, it's
velour.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. I mean, I feel like I kind of want one. I kind of want to like steal it as our own. But the story of the game was the high leverage plays, right? You've got Minnesota seemingly take so many plays inside the red zone. There was a point in the game where Sam Darnold was 1 for 9 for 3 yards on passes inside the 10. And how many times this year have we raved about the Minnesota Vikings tight red zone offense and inside the 10 and scheming plays open?
It's usually where O'Connell is so good.
Yeah, so I had to look. So I looked up these stats mid-game, and Darnold was 1 for 9 at one point. And off the top of my head, I'm like, this has been one of his strengths, right?
Right.
He came into the game leading the league at 77% inside the 10-yard line, and he goes 1 for 9. The Lions were incredible at making those key stops, but also Darnold missed some throws. He had some opportunities early.
Yeah, no, they did. Like, the Vikings offense was getting murdered in the red zone, particularly the tight red zone. And that was in part because the Lions were just being so aggressive on defense, blitzing heavy, coming after them, and it was working. And Darnold was overthrowing guys, missing open receivers, all those kinds of things. And then the other story early in the game, obviously before it spiraled out of control and became a massive beatdown, those high leverage plays. We talk about every single Lions game, right? The Lions converted a couple of them early, turned them into touchdowns instead of settling for kicks.
Right.
And the Vikings, I don't know whether they were caught up in the same, we need to keep pace. We need to do what Detroit does. We need to do the same thing. They went for a couple of 4th downs and they failed. So it's like these high leverage plays, 4 of them all broke for Detroit early in the game.
And look, those are the right moves. Again, you hear the rumblings a lot. Like, what if Kevin O'Connell kicked 3 field goals instead? It's like they still would have gotten killed, right? Because part of the decision is you're playing, let's be serious, an historically good offense. As good as the Minnesota offense has been, and we've raved about their pass catchers and everything, the Lions are historically good. We just saw the graphic, 3rd most offensive touchdowns in our 2nd most in NFL history. Yeah, there's 17 games, but they're up there in this top 5 or 6 offenses in history putting points on the board. You have to be able to keep up. And look, if you fail, you fail. But like kicking field goals, if they kicked those field goals, we would have said, okay, you idiot. At some point, the Lions are going to get theirs. And eventually they did run away and get their 31. And also, by the way, after the Vikings failed at one of their 4th downs, they got the quick pick and we're right back at field goal range. So it kind of evened out.
But it's also interesting because at that point, you don't know what type of game this was,
Yeah.
Everybody predicted going into this game, shootout. The over-under was, 56.5, something like that, which must have got pretty close, actually, by the end. But
it did.
At that point, we assumed this was going to be a shootout, right? So when Detroit goes for their fourth down, they get it, they turn it into a touchdown. The first time one came up for Minnesota, they must have been thinking, we're going to need 30 points in this game, which they did by the end of it.
Yeah.
But, they weren't expecting this to be a 10-6 game, deep into it. Like, they might have been thinking, we need this fourth down. They got theirs. The first one, I think, was a fantastic example, though. Like, the first fourth down, Detroit goes for it. The Vikings got pressure, right? Like the first game. They were really close. Goff got it away anyway, hit his man, conversion. The next play, Jahmyr Gibbs gets a touchdown.
That was a great play by Goff on 4th and 5, by the way, on that
So
play.
that would have been a 57-yard field goal, I think.
Yeah.
Inches from being a negative play. Like, they got the pressure. They almost got to him. And instead, the next play, Detroit turns it into a touchdown, right? So those are the margins. The Lions are going to give you those plays, but they made the plays. They've been doing this all season long. And then you go full circle to the end of the game. There's a fourth down where everything is actually saying kick it again. Kick it, makes it a 3-score game. It ices it. And because they've been going for them all season long, they're able to fake it, make the Minnesota Vikings jump offside. And then they're like, see, we suck again. We didn't even need to do it this time because we've been doing it all season long.
And they would have kicked it. I think they would have kicked it to go up 18. The Lions we're talking about. They would have gone up 18. They come and they draw the Vikings offside.
This is now several layers deep, right? It's not just dumb, boneheaded aggression for no cause. They are thinking about it. They're laying bear traps for you, and they're coming back later in the game in a high leverage situation in the most important game of the season, and they pick up a free first down because they sucker the Vikings defense because they've already got them 2 times in the game.
And then we got to shout out Jahmyr Gibbs, man. 23 carries for 139, 3 touchdowns on the ground.
Yeah.
Another touchdown through the air, and that one was huge too. That was a 4th and 2. Lions go for it because that's what they do on 4th down. And Gibbs, was it Van Ginkel trying to cover him? No one was even near him. He runs a little angle route for a touchdown. So 4 touchdowns for Jahmyr Gibbs. Once again, showing without David Montgomery, he can handle the workload. He's going to go 20-plus carries. And I think you made this point too. The more you hand it to him, the more opportunities there are for those big plays. And sometimes it feels like the big play guy is kind of saved for only 15 touches. But Gibbs, closing in on 30 touches in the game, he's going to create a whole lot of big plays. And he did in this one with the 4 touchdowns. And I just want to apologize for ever questioning Jahmyr Gibbs at number 12 overall.
But also it's like the Saquon Barkley dynamic, right? Like, they've taken Jahmyr Gibbs and added him to the
with
best.
all these other pieces.
Right, to one of the best offensive lines in the NFL, with an elite play caller, with a quarterback that's cooking, with all these weapons. That's where it makes this kind of impact, right? If you took Jahmyr Gibbs and you put him on an offense that had none of that, and you're like, okay, 12th overall pick, fix the offense, it would be a different conversation, right? So he's able to have that impact because of how good everything else is around him, and then you get to see the kind of dynamism he brings to the table. But I think that idea, right, of he's an elite, he's a small guy, he's explosive, but you don't want to give that guy the workload. I feel like that's a season-long problem, right? Could Jahmyr Gibbs handle the Saquon workload from this year? Maybe not. But can he do it for 4 or 5 games?
Yeah.
Probably.
Especially with a bye coming up now.
Right.
So that helps, and then it's a 3-game stretch in the playoffs. And by the way, the report on Sunday Night Football, I point back because that's where we watched it.
Yes.
Was that David Montgomery's feeling good. And Tirico was kind of hinting at he's smiling and, he's not on IR. And with the week off, is he going to be back?
I mean, Anzalone was back for this game.
Yep.
Made some big plays, gave up some as well, but it was a factor. David Montgomery might be back after this bye. Was talking about maybe he could do it this week, but probably back for the next game. Carlton Davis could be back with his broken jaw, and they might need him because Terry and Arnold went down. Like, we're going to focus on what it means for Minnesota, but this game had such huge amounts of leverage because that number 1 seed is so important. The Lions got it. They got the game. They out-coached, out-executed Minnesota. They now have a bye to get healthy, and the playoffs come through Detroit. And we saw, early in the game, Ford Field was rocking, incredibly noisy. It made an impact on even an offense as good as Minnesota's. Lions fans in the chat here to pay the bills. Lions fans are going to be a factor.
We talked about Detroit's only a 4-hour trip. We should try to get up for the game,
right?
If we can. We should see if we can get up to the game this year.
Ford Field, the Lions fans, they're going to be a factor for this playoff run.
No, they absolutely will be. And the whack-a-mole does continue with the injuries, though. So you mentioned Terry and Arnold. Kevin Zeitler at guard. He comes out late as well. So, they're hoping to get a few players back, but we have to keep an eye on Terry and Arnold and Kevin Zeitler. Hopefully the extra week helps there as well. So that's it from a Lions perspective. And then you made the point, and this came up a few times, red zone with Minnesota, but also blitz answers, right? So you're talking about the Detroit defense that had not played well in recent weeks. This is a big part of why we predicted a shootout. But when they brought pressure, they got 4-man pressure and they got blitz pressure. And that 4th and 15 at the end of the game where Chris was pointing out in particular, you're waiting for a 15-yard route. And I know it's 4th and 15, but there's no quick answers to Aaron Glenn's blitz. And somebody made the point, Aaron Glenn, future head coach candidate, and Ben Johnson, head coach candidate, they're allowed to be interviewed or requested to be interviewed tomorrow. Yeah. It was a great final run for both coordinators for the Lions.
Incredible statement. I don't want to take anything away from the Lions or their coaches. I think they won this game. They outcoached the Vikings. But the flip side of that coin is I think this is a real damaging indictment of both sides of Minnesota's scheme and execution. Obviously, we're going to focus on Flores and the fact that his defense has basically been undressed by Ben Johnson and the Lions offense for 3 consecutive games. But Kevin O'Connell's offense had no answers to what was, it wasn't the most complicated, game plan in the world. They just sent a ton of pressure. They're like, we're going to play man coverage on the back end, even though we're depleted, and we're going to send the house. And the Vikings had, no answers. Darnold missed some throws early, which, were there, I guess. And if he'd made them, we would be maybe talking about him in the Jared Goff light. He just made the plays. But late in the game, they're still doing it. There's no adjustment. There's no quick game. Think of what Joe Burrow looked like on Saturday, right? Yesterday, where they just said, look, they're going to be aggressive. They're going to come after you, get the ball out of your hands in 2 seconds and find the receivers. And Burrow just did it time after time after time after time. Quick game, short passes, open guys, man coverage beaters. Where was any of that in this game?
There were no good answers for that. And look, Darnold deserves some criticism, man. We've been praising him all year, and rightfully so. This game, though, 18 of 41 for 166. Obviously, all that's not on him, but pocket movement. To me, it felt like the Lions did a really nice job, just compressing the pocket, getting pressured. I don't think Darnold handled it very well. Pocket movement was, a little questionable, I think, as far as Darnold goes. They missed some open throws, and they didn't scheme open answers, right? And look, I've been raving about the Vikings having answers. Jordan Addison doesn't have a catch. Justin Jefferson has just 3. They have Hawkinson, 2 catches for 9 yards. And I don't know how much the Anzalone thing helps, and that pushes Jack Campbell to a different role. Maybe it does help the entire defense, and that's the key, because the Lions have been raving about Anzalone for years, right? Yeah. Even if a PFF grade or the on-field production doesn't match elite levels, but they talk about his elite impact, and maybe that's it. But you gotta say Minnesota kind of laid an egg offensively with the season on the line. Well, at least a big part of the season on the line. They could still make a run here, but this was the worst offensive performance they've had all year.
Yeah,
since the Jags game.
Right. I think Kevin O'Connell will probably end up winning Coach of the Year, but he got out-coached in this game, and this was the game where Darnold had a disaster. We'd been sort of waiting. Is he gonna turn into a pumpkin all season long? He did in this game. Now, I don't know if that's a permanent thing as opposed to just a bad game. And, we've said Kevin O'Connell had no answers, but Darnold was terrible in this game. This was the first time. We've said this for a while, right? One of the most impressive things about Darnold this season is every setback he's bounced back from. Yeah. This game he didn't. He made mistakes.
Within the game, he did not.
He made mistakes. He missed receivers. He, screwed things up. He took a terrible sack early in the game. After the Vikings got the ball and needed to answer, he took an awful sack, lost a ton of yardage, and then at no point in the game bounced back. Just kept digging and digging and digging, quicksand, and it was a disaster. So, I don't think that's a permanent thing. But now there's no margin for error. You lost the most you could lose. Number 1 seed's gone. You're now on the road to the other team that beat you this season. And now you have no margin for error. If you don't bounce back next week, you're gone.
All right, let's break down what this all means. Of course, Detroit earns the #1 seed. They're off next week. They'll be hosting a divisional round game in a couple weeks here. Minnesota, they're locked into the 5 seed, and it's the Rams at the #4 seed now. We didn't know.
Rested players.
They rested players. They went from the 3 to the 4 to now host Minnesota. And so that's going to be the Monday night game. Remember, the Monday night game in Wild Card Weekend, it always has to be a 4 versus 5 matchup so that all of the matchups are locked in going into the 4 versus 5, and that's exactly what it'll be. They picked they always pick one of the 4 versus 5s, and the Texans always have to play at Saturday at 4:30. So it's Minnesota at the Rams next week, 4 versus 5 matchup on Monday night.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be a fascinating game, right? Up until this game, the Rams handed the Vikings the most conclusive loss that they'd had this season. So, number one, is that the way this game goes? Number two, they gave them that beating after they played Detroit, the Honolulu flu game, right? Is that a thing? Because if it is, they got their ass kicked in this game, let alone the game after it.
Honolulu flu short week versus Honolulu flu on a Monday night game, so you got at least the extra day now.
That's the one silver lining for this for Minnesota is they get the Monday night game, they get the longest amount of rest they can get, so at least they have that going for them.
All right, anything else on Minnesota Detroit? I think that's a pretty good recap there. But congrats to the Lions for the #1 seed, first time in their franchise history.
Incredible season by Detroit. I mean, one of the reasons I think that Kevin O'Connell will win Coach of the Year as opposed to, say, Dan Campbell, right, is preseason expectations. The Lions were at least expected to be good. The Vikings were not. So you sort of say he's exceeded expectations. That being said, all the injuries for Detroit, right, the laundry list of injuries, and they keep coming. You know, Terry and Arnold down as well, maybe Kevin Zeitler, like so many injuries. For them to still be as good as they look right now, I mean, they just annihilated a 14-win Minnesota Vikings team for the second time this season, getting that win. You cannot say enough good things about this Detroit Lions team, what they're doing, what they might still do, and how good a season this has already been.
From top to bottom, by the way. Brad Holmes at the top.
Yeah.
We know a lot of the people in their front office. They are excellent. Their pro personnel department to get so many of the replacements throughout the years. We have raved about Detroit's team building effort for years now. You saw all of that this year. It all culminated in this 15-2 season.
Thanks for watching all the way to the end of our video.
For more great content, click here to subscribe and here to watch another video. We'll see you again soon.